I built an equipment empire out of a two-car garage in Cleveland, Ohio. I survived recessions, union strikes, and 3 separate attempts by bigger companies to swallow me whole. But none of that prepared me for the sentence that nearly stopped my heart a second time, whispered by the woman my son married, standing 3 feet from what she thought was my deathbed. "Your dad won't make it till morning," she said into her phone, her voice calm, almost bored, like she was reading a weather forecast. She didn't know I was awake. I am Walter. I am 68 years old, and this is the night my own family decided I was already gone. Let me take you back 6 days before that whisper found its way into my ears. I was standing on the gravel lot of Hale Machinery and Rentals at 6 in the morning, the way I had for 41 years, watching the first crews load excavators onto flatbeds before the sun had fully cleared the tree line. The cold bit through my jacket, but I liked it. Cold mornings were where I built this company. Back in 1985, I didn't have excavators. I had one rusted-out backhoe, a garage that smelled like diesel and burnt coffee, and a wife named Margaret who believed in me when the bank didn't. Margaret passed 11 years ago. Since then, the company had become the only thing left standing that carried her fingerprints alongside mine because she used to keep the books at that same kitchen table where I signed our very first lease. I had one son, Marcus. He was 40 years old, and I had made him chief operating officer 8 years earlier, mostly out of love, partly out of guilt for all the birthdays I missed while I was out on job sites, keeping this company alive. I told myself he had grown into the role. I told myself the numbers didn't lie, even when a small, persistent voice in the back of my skull whispered that the numbers Marcus showed me were always the numbers Marcus wanted me to see. His wife, Erica, was sharp in the way a knife is sharp, beautiful, precise, and always 3 moves ahead of everyone else in the room. She had married into this family with a business degree and an appetite that no amount of money ever seemed to satisfy. I had watched her eyes move across our dining room during Thanksgiving, cataloging the value of the chandelier, the china, the property line. I told myself I was being an unfair old man. I told myself a father shouldn't judge the woman his son loves. I was wrong to give myself that pass, and it very nearly cost me everything. The morning it started, I was walking the yard doing my usual inspection when the pain hit. It didn't announce itself with drama. It came as a strange tightness behind my left eye, then a numbness crawling down my arm like cold water finding the lowest point of a floor. My foot caught wrong on a patch of gravel, and the next thing I knew, the sky and the ground had traded places, and I was staring up at the gray Ohio clouds while my crew foreman, a good man named Rudy, who had worked for me for 18 years, screamed for someone to call 911. They told me later it was a moderate ischemic stroke, complicated by an irregular heart rhythm that had likely been building for months. I remember fragments, the siren, the paramedic's flashlight in my eyes, the hospital ceiling tiles sliding past like a film strip. And I remember, somewhere in that chaos, feeling a strange and stubborn clarity settle into me, the same clarity I used to feel negotiating a brutal contract at 2 in the morning. My body was failing. My mind was not. By the time they wheeled me into the intensive care unit, the left side of my face had gone slack, and my speech came out slurred, thick, unusable. The attending neurologist explained to my nurse, in the clinical, detached way doctors talk when they think the patient can't fully track the conversation, that I was in a post-stroke sedated state, heavily monitored, likely to remain minimally responsive for the next 24 to 48 hours while they controlled the swelling. What none of them accounted for was this. My mind was clear, my eyes could open, my hearing worked perfectly. I simply could not make my mouth cooperate long enough to tell anyone that Marcus and Erica arrived 4 hours later. I heard the door before I saw them, that particular hydraulic hiss ICU doors make. I forced my eyes open just enough to see them through a blur, Marcus in his work suit, tie slightly loosened, doing his best impression of a worried son, and Erica 2 steps behind him in a cream-colored coat, holding her phone like it was surgically attached to her hand. "Dad," Marcus said, and his voice cracked in a way that, God help me, still made something in my chest ache with the old instinct of a father wanting to comfort his boy. He took my hand. It felt heavy and distant, like it belonged to someone else, The nurse explained my condition in gentle terms. Stable but critical, heavily sedated. Not likely to be responsive tonight. She said it kindly. The way you'd explain something to grieving relatives, because that is exactly what she believed she was doing. Marcus nodded along, squeezing my hand once more before letting it drop back onto the blanket. And then, the moment the nurse stepped out to check another patient, something in the room changed. I felt it before I understood it, the way you feel a storm front pressing against a window even with your eyes closed. Erica stepped closer to the bed, not out of tenderness, out of calculation. She glanced at the monitor, glanced at my slack face, and satisfied that the sedated old man in front of her was exactly as helpless as advertised. She lifted her phone to her ear.
Yeah, it's bad.
She said quietly, her back half turned toward Marcus, who was staring out the window with his arms crossed, saying nothing, doing nothing to stop her. Your dad won't make it till morning, she whispered into the phone. And for one spent second I thought absurdly foolishly that she might be talking to a hospice coordinator, arranging comfort care, doing something merciful. She was not. We need Bill's signature on the transfer agreement before Thursday's board call, she continued, her voice dropping into something efficient, businesslike, the tone she used when closing a deal on a kitchen renovation. Once he's gone, Marcus becomes sole executor under the buy-sell clause, and we don't need the old man's blessing anymore. Tell the fund we can close by next week. Just make sure the paperwork says incapacitated, not deceased, in case this drags out a little. We don't want anything that could get challenged later. I lay there, a fully conscious man trapped behind a paralyzed face, listening to my son's wife discuss the timeline of my death like a closing date on a house. My heart monitor, I was told later, spiked hard enough that a nurse 2 rooms down glanced at her station screen, frowned, and made a note to check on me again in 10 minutes. I willed my body to hold still. Every instinct in me wanted to scream, to grab that phone out of her manicured hand and hurl it against the wall. Instead, I did the only thing 41 years of surviving cutthroat contract negotiations had trained into my bones. I stayed perfectly, terrifyingly silent. Marcus finally turned from the window. Is that Devon? He asked quietly, referring, I would later learn, to the private equity broker they had already been meeting with in secret for months. He wants confirmation tonight, Erica said, lowering the phone. He says the fund is getting nervous about the timeline. They want the equipment rental division locked in before the quarter closes. He'll get his confirmation, Marcus said, and there was something in his voice I had never heard before. Not grief, not fear, relief. My own son, standing beside what he believed was my deathbed, sounded relieved. I want you to understand something about the man I was before that whisper. I had given Marcus everything. I paid for his college without a single loan, co-signed his first house, handed him a title most executives spend 30 years clawing toward, and I had done it because I believed, with the same stubborn faith that built this company out of a garage, that blood meant something. That whisper didn't just reveal a scheme, it revealed 40 years of blindness, and in the space of one sentence, I felt something inside my chest go cold in a way that had nothing to do with the stroke. They stayed only another 20 minutes. Erica kissed my forehead with lips that felt like they belonged to a stranger and told the nurse on the way out, in a voice thick with performed sorrow, that they'd be back first thing in the morning, that they just needed to go home and process everything. Marcus squeezed my hand one last time. He told me he loved me. I believed in that single moment that some fractured part of him actually meant it, and that made the whole thing so much worse. The door hissed shut behind them. I lay in that dim room, machines humming, tubes running into my arm, and for the first time since the gravel lot had rushed up to meet my face, I let myself feel the full, staggering weight of what I now knew. My son was not waiting for me to die. My son was already spending the proceeds. I don't know how long I lay there before the anger finally arrived, but when it did, it didn't come as heat. It came as ice, clean and precise, the same cold clarity I used to feel walking into a hostile negotiation knowing I already held the better hand. I flexed the fingers of my right hand slowly, testing. They moved. Stiff, weak, but they moved. I turned my head just an inch toward the small table beside my bed where the nurse had left my personal phone, plugged in, screen dark, waiting. I thought of Denise Alvarez, my chief financial officer, the only person in that entire building who had earned the right to be called family without sharing a drop of my blood. Denise had been with me for 22 years. She had sat across from me in 2009 when the recession nearly buried us, and instead of jumping ship, she'd taken a pay cut alongside me to keep our crews employed. If there was one person on this earth who could help me find out exactly how deep this betrayal ran, it was her. With my left hand still refusing to cooperate, I reached across my own body with my right, ignoring the sharp pull of the IV line, and closed my stiff fingers around the phone. The screen lit up, blinding in the dark room. I stared at the keypad through blurred vision, willing my thumb to find the right numbers. And somewhere behind that effort, underneath the fear and the fury, a single thought settled into place with the weight of a foundation stone. They had made a fatal mistake tonight. They had assumed that because my mouth wouldn't move, my mind had already left the building. They were about to learn exactly how wrong they were. My thumb finally found Denise's contact, and I pressed call, my hand trembling against the cold plastic rail of the hospital bed. It rang once, twice. On the third ring, I heard her voice, thick with sleep and instant alarm, because a call from my number at 11 at night meant only one thing to a woman who had spent 2 decades reading my moods like weather patterns. "Walter? Walter, are you okay?" The hospital called the office's line. They said you had a stroke. "I've been trying to reach Marcus for an hour, and he's not answering." "Denise," I managed, my voice a slurred, broken thing, barely recognizable even to myself, but I forced every syllable out like I was dragging them uphill. "Listen, do not drive here." There was a stunned silence on the other end, the sound of her sitting up in bed, fully alert now. "Walter, what's wrong with your voice? Are you being watched? Blink twice if I'm alone." I cut in, slow, deliberate. "I need you. At your desk. Right now. It's 11 at night." "Denise," I said, and something in my tone must have carried across that phone line the way it always had in every hard conversation we'd ever survived together. Because her breathing changed, sharpened, the way it used to, right before we walked into a room to fight for this company's survival. "I'm at my desk," she said simply. "Tell me what you need." "Marcus," I whispered, "and Erica. They think I'm dying tonight. They're already selling the company. Private equity. A man named Devon. I need to know how far it's gone." The silence that followed lasted only a heartbeat, but I felt the entire shape of her disbelief pour through that silence, followed almost instantly by something colder, sharper, replacing it. "I've seen something," she said quietly. "3 weeks ago. A folder on the shared drive I wasn't supposed to have access to. I thought it was old vendor paperwork. I didn't look closely. Walter, I am so sorry. I should have." "Look now," I said. "Everything. Tonight. Give me 20 minutes." The line went dead. I lowered the phone back onto the blanket, my chest heaving with an effort that had nothing to do with my damaged heart, and stared up at the ceiling tiles, waiting for the storm I had just summoned to answer. 22 minutes later, my phone buzzed once against the blanket. I answered on the first vibration, my thumb still clumsy, still slow, but faster now than it had been an hour before. Whatever the doctors wanted to call my condition, my body was already fighting its way back, fueled by something no medication in that IV bag could have provided. "Walter." Denise's voice had changed entirely. The sleepy alarm was gone, replaced by the flat, controlled tone she used when she was standing at the edge of very bad news and refusing to let it knock her down. "I'm looking at it right now. I don't know how to say this gently, so I'm just going to say it." "Say it," I whispered. "Marcus has been in negotiations with a private equity fund called Brentwood Capital Partners for at least 4 months. They're structuring an acquisition of the equipment rental division. 60% of it, Walter. Not a partnership. An acquisition, and the valuation they're using is criminal. They've got us listed at 11 million under our actual asset value. Someone fed them numbers that make this company look like it's struggling." "Who signed the letter of intent?" There was a pause, the sound of her scrolling, of pages loading. "It's not fully executed yet. It's contingent." Another pause, longer this time, and I could hear something in her breathing shift. the sound of a woman bracing herself before delivering the worst part. It's contingent on a transfer of executive authority. There's a clause here referencing a medical incapacitation provision in the shareholder agreement. Walter, did you know about a provision like that? I closed my eyes. 15 years ago, in a moment of what I thought was responsible foresight, I had signed a standard succession clause that any lawyer would call boilerplate. If I became medically incapacitated and unable to perform my duties, executive authority would transfer automatically to my designated successor, pending board ratification. I had designated Marcus. I had done it out of love, out of pride, out of the naive belief that a father's trust was the safest inheritance he could leave behind. I had never imagined that clause would become a countdown clock for my own murder by neglect. I signed it, I said. They're using your stroke as the trigger, Denise said, and I heard her voice crack for the first time in 22 years of knowing her. Walter, there's an email thread here between Marcus and Erica's personal account, dated 3 hours ago. It references tonight. It says, and I'm reading this exactly, doctor says it's unlikely he makes it through the night, moving forward with Devon on the incapacitation filing in the morning. Tell your uncle we can close by Friday. I lay in that hospital bed, tubes running into arms that had built this company brick by brick, board by board, contract by contract, and I felt something inside me that had nothing to do with rage anymore. It was grief. Pure, uncomplicated grief, the kind that arrives only once you've finally stopped pretending. I had lost Margaret 11 years ago to cancer. I had thought that was the worst loss a man could survive. I was wrong. This was worse, because Margaret's death had been an accident of biology. This was a choice. My son had looked at his dying father and calculated a closing date. Denise, I said, my voice steadying now, the slur receding as adrenaline burned through whatever fog the medication had left behind. I need you to print everything, every email, every draft agreement, every wire authorization. Paper, not screens, and I need you to call Tom Reyes. Tom Reyes had been my estate attorney for nearly 2 decades, a sharp, unflinching man who had helped Margaret and me draft our first will, back when our biggest asset was a single garage and a stubborn belief in each other. If anyone could build a wall around what remained of my life's work before Marcus and Erica finished dismantling it, it was Tom. It's midnight, Walter. He's answered worse calls from me at worse hours, I said. Tell him I'm alive. Tell him I need him tomorrow morning, before visiting hours. And Denise, tell no one else. Not Rudy, not the board, not a single soul in that building. If word gets back to Marcus that I'm awake before I'm ready for him to know it, we lose the only advantage I have left, which is, they think I'm already gone, I said quietly. Let them keep thinking that a little while longer. The next morning arrived gray and cold, the kind of Cleveland sky that seemed to press directly down onto the hospital roof. I had spent the hours before dawn practicing, in secret, the small movements the doctors didn't yet know I'd recovered. Squeezing a rolled-up washcloth with my left hand, mouthing words silently until my tongue remembered its shape. By the time the day nurse came in to check my vitals at 6, I had already decided that I would let the world believe I was still trapped behind that slack, sedated face for exactly as long as it served me, and not 1 hour longer. Tom Reyes arrived at 7:15, slipping past the front desk with the quiet efficiency of a man who had spent 30 years learning how hospitals worked. He pulled a chair beside my bed, glanced at the monitors, and studied my face with the sharp, assessing look of a lawyer sizing up a witness. Denise told me what she found, he said without preamble. I've read the emails. I want you to understand something before we go any further, Walter. If even a fraction of what's in that thread is accurate, your son and daughter-in-law aren't just planning a hostile business maneuver. They may be committing fraud against the estate of a living person, which is a phrase I have genuinely never had to say to a client before. I heard her say it herself, I said, my voice still thick, still slow, but clear enough now to carry meaning. Standing right there. Your dad won't make it till morning. Like she was reading me a weather report. Tom's jaw tightened. For a moment, the sharp legal composure slipped, and I saw something almost paternal in his eyes, an old friend's fury on my behalf. Then we don't play defense, he said. We take the wheel entirely out of their hands tonight before Marcus can execute anything with that succession clause. There's a board call Thursday, I said. Devon wants Bill's signature before then. Bill Ostrander, Tom said, nodding grimly. Chairs the board's finance committee. If Marcus gets to him first with a story about your condition, he could push through an emergency ratification before you've said a single word to anyone. I thought about that succession clause, the one I'd signed with such naive confidence 15 years earlier, and felt the old instinct rise in me, the one that had carried Hale machinery through recessions and lawsuits and betrayals by business partners who turned out to be less honest than their handshakes suggested. Then we move faster than Devon, I said. Get me a laptop. Get me Denise. And get me every legal tool you have to lock this company into something Marcus can't touch, even if the board tries to ratify him tomorrow morning. Tom studied me for a long moment. You're supposed to be minimally responsive for another day, according to your chart. I am, I said, and for the first time since that whisper had reached my ears, something that might have been the ghost of a smile pulled at the working half of my mouth. Minimally responsive to my family, fully responsive to my lawyer. By 9 that morning, Denise had smuggled a laptop into my room, inside a stack of blank get-well cards, the same old trick she'd used decades ago to sneak spreadsheets past a skeptical bank auditor. Tom worked the phone from the hallway, his voice low and clipped, calling in favors from every corner of the Cleveland legal world he'd built over 30 years. Between the two of them, and whatever strength I could summon from a body, still fighting its way back from a stroke, we spent the next 6 hours constructing a wall. I signed nothing that day with my real signature. Instead, working through Tom, we executed a series of emergency filings under my legal capacity as founder and majority shareholder, a status the stroke had weakened but never actually revoked. We moved 61% of my personal shares in Hale Machinery into an irrevocable trust, one Tom had drafted years earlier for exactly this kind of catastrophic scenario and updated overnight with Denise's numbers as our foundation. The trust's terms were simple and absolute. No sale, transfer, or restructuring of the equipment rental division could proceed without the trustee's signature, and the trustee, effective immediately, was not Marcus. It was Denise. He's going to know something's wrong the moment he calls the bank, Denise said, watching the confirmation screen load on the laptop balanced across my hospital tray. Let him find out, I said. Let him find out exactly the way I found out. In the dark, with no warning and completely unable to stop it. At 11 that morning, the ICU door hissed open, and Marcus walked in alone, dressed in a fresh suit, his tie perfectly knotted, carrying a leather portfolio under his arm that I recognized instantly as the same kind Tom used for closing documents. He stopped short at the sight of Denise, sitting beside my bed, laptop open, papers spread across the tray table. What is this? He asked, his eyes flicking between us with the first flicker of genuine alarm I'd seen from him since this nightmare began. Sit down, Marcus, I said, my voice still slower than it used to be, still carrying the faint drag of the stroke, but unmistakably, undeniably conscious. I watched the exact moment the blood drained from his face, the moment he understood that the father he had been quietly writing an obituary for was very much awake and had been listening. Dad, he stammered, they told us you weren't responsive, they said. I know exactly what they said, I replied. I was there. I heard everything, Marcus. Every word your wife whispered into that phone last night, standing 3 feet from what she believed was my deathbed. The leather portfolio slipped slightly in his grip. I don't know what you think you heard, but Devon, I said, and watched him flinch like I'd struck him. Brentwood Capital Partners. 60% of the rental division, valued $11 million below what it's actually worth. The transfer clause. Bill's signature by Thursday. I let each detail land like a slow, deliberate blow, watching my son's carefully constructed composure crumble piece by piece. I heard your wife tell someone that as soon as I was gone, you wouldn't need my blessing anymore. Marcus said nothing. He simply stood there, the portfolio hanging limp in his hand, his eyes darting toward Denise, toward the laptop, toward me, searching for some angle he hadn't yet considered, some door that hadn't already been quietly welded shut while he'd spent the morning celebrating. That portfolio, I said quietly. Is that the incapacitation filing? The one you were bringing to have me sign while I was too drugged to understand what I was putting my name to? His silence was answer enough. You should open it anyway, I said. Read it out loud if you'd like. I'd love to hear, in your own voice, exactly what you were prepared to do to your father. He didn't open it. He simply stood in that sterile room, 39 years of being my son, collapsing in real time under the weight of what I now knew, and for one brief, aching moment I saw something flicker across his face that might have been shame. It didn't last. It never does, with men who've already convinced themselves the ends justify the betrayal. You don't understand the pressure I've been under, he finally said, and I felt something in my chest go colder than it had all night. Not an apology, an excuse. Tell me, I said. Tell me exactly what pressure justified planning my death like a real estate closing. The pressure of being your son, Marcus said, and his voice finally cracked open, spilling out something that sounded less like a defense and more like a confession. Do you have any idea what it's like to inherit a legacy you never actually built? Everyone in that building calls me the guy who got handed the keys. I wanted to prove I could do something on my own, Dad. 2 years ago, I put $240,000 into a commercial property deal in Akron. Erica's cousin brought it to me. It collapsed in 4 months. I lost almost all of it. I couldn't tell you. I couldn't stand the look you'd give me, the same look you're giving me right now. So instead of telling me the truth, I said, you decided to sell the company out from under me while I was unconscious in a hospital bed. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, he said, and for the first time, real tears gathered at the corners of his eyes. The stroke wasn't part of the plan. We were going to wait for you to retire, ease you into it, present the Brentwood deal as a modernization strategy, something you'd eventually agree to. But then you collapsed, and Erica said, he stopped himself. Say it, I said quietly. She said it was an opportunity, Marcus whispered, and the shame in his voice was real now, raw and unpracticed. She said we shouldn't waste it. The door opened again before I could respond, and Erica stepped through it, phone still in hand, her cream coat replaced by a sharp charcoal blazer, dressed for a business meeting rather than a hospital visit. She stopped mid-stride the instant she registered the scene in front of her, my open eyes, Denise's laptop, Marcus's collapsed posture, and I watched 20 years of careful, practiced composure evaporate off her face in a single frozen second. You're awake, she said, and there was no warmth in the observation, no relief. Only the flat calculation of a woman rapidly recalculating a plan that had just failed in real time. I've been awake since last night, I said. Since roughly the moment you told someone on the phone that your father-in-law wouldn't survive till morning. That's not what I said, Erica replied instantly, smoothly, the lie arriving so fast it must have been rehearsed on the drive over the moment Marcus had texted her that something had gone wrong. I was talking about insurance paperwork. You're twisting my words. I heard every syllable, Erica, I said. Devon's name, Brentwood Capital, the transfer clause, Bill's signature. Tell your uncle we can close by Friday. Would you like me to keep going? Or shall we call Devon right now and ask him to confirm the conversation on speaker? Her jaw tightened, the mask cracking at last, revealing something underneath it that was neither grief nor guilt, only pure, undiluted fury at having been caught. You have no idea what it's like watching this family throw away opportunities out of sentimentality, she snapped. This company is worth 11 million more than what you're running it as. Marcus and I could have doubled it. You've been running this place like it's still 1985. This company, I said slowly, was built in 1985 by a man and his wife who slept on a garage floor because they were too broke for an apartment. Every board, every rivet, every dollar in it carries her fingerprints. I wasn't going to let two people who couldn't wait 12 hours to start dividing the spoils decide it was time to sell that out from under her memory. I turned to Denise, who had remained silent through the entire exchange, watching with the same fierce protective stillness she'd carried since the night she'd stayed up until 3 a.m, helping me trace every wire, every email, every lie. Show them, I said. Denise turned the laptop screen toward Marcus and Erica, revealing the confirmation page for the irrevocable trust, 61% of my shares, effective as of 6 that morning, trustee authority permanently vested in her name, explicit language prohibiting any transfer, sale, or restructuring of Hale machinery and rentals without her written consent. You can't do that, Marcus said, staring at the screen. You need board ratification for something this large. I don't, Tom Reyes said from the doorway, stepping into the room with the calm precision of a man delivering a verdict rather than an opinion. Your father executed this under his personal shareholder authority, which was never actually revoked, because he was never actually incapacitated in the legal sense your incapacitation filing required. A stroke that leaves a man conscious, cognitively intact, and capable of directing his own affairs does not meet the statutory threshold you were counting on. I've had it independently reviewed by 2 other attorneys this morning. It's airtight. I watched something break in Marcus's face. Not the theatrical anguish he'd performed at my bedside the night before, but something quieter, more permanent, the look of a man realizing that the ground he thought he'd been standing on had never existed in the first place. There was a smaller detail sitting on the tray table beside me, one I hadn't mentioned yet, one I'd been saving. Denise had found it buried in the same shared drive folder where she'd discovered the Brentwood emails. An old scanned document from 9 years earlier, a medical billing statement addressed to a woman named Carol Whitfield, marked paid in full anonymous donor. Carol Whitfield was Erica's older sister. She had needed a kidney transplant that her insurance refused to fully cover, and 9 years ago, before Erica had even married into this family, I had quietly paid the remaining $83,000 through a foundation I ran without ever once telling anyone, including Erica, where the money had come from. I hadn't planned to bring it up. But watching Erica stand there, calculating her next move like she was still negotiating a business deal, instead of standing in the wreckage of a family, something in me needed her to understand exactly what kind of man she had been so willing to let die overnight. Erica, I said quietly, do you know who paid for Carol's transplant surgery in 2015? The $83,000 her insurance wouldn't cover? Her expression flickered, confusion breaking through the calculation for the first time. The Hartwell Foundation, she said slowly. Why does that? I started the Hartwell Foundation, I said. Named it after my grandmother. I read about Carol's case in a local paper, in an article that never even mentioned your name, and I made a call. I've never told a living soul, including my own son, because I never did it to be thanked. I did it because it was the right thing to do for a stranger. The color drained from her face, and for one unguarded moment, I saw something almost human crack through the careful architecture of her composure. You saved my sister's life, she whispered. And you were prepared to let me die in a hospital bed to save yourself the inconvenience of my recovery. I said, I want you to sit with that, both of you. Neither of them said a word. Marcus stared at the floor. Erica stared at me, and for the first time since she'd married into this family, I watched her search my face for something other than an asset to be evaluated. 2 weeks later, Hale Machinery and Rentals held its 40th anniversary gala at the Renaissance Ballroom downtown, an event Marcus had been planning for 8 months, originally intended, I now understood, as the public stage where he would announce the Brentwood partnership as a bold new chapter for the company. He hadn't canceled it. I suspect he'd been too frightened of the questions a cancellation would raise. Instead, he'd quietly stripped the acquisition announcement from the program and replaced it with vague language about operational modernization, hoping to slip the real plan through in smaller, quieter pieces over the following months. Once the initial scrutiny had faded, I let him believe that was still possible, right up until the moment I walked onto that stage myself. 400 employees, vendors, and longtime clients filled that ballroom, along with half the Cleveland business press, drawn by the milestone of 40 years, and, whether they admitted it or not, the rumors already circulating about my health. Marcus stood at the podium in a tailored suit, delivering a polished speech about legacy and the future, carefully avoiding any direct mention of me. When I stepped through the side entrance with Denise on one arm and Tom Reyes on the other, moving slower than I used to, but moving under my own power, my recovery further along than anyone outside my inner circle knew. The room fell into a silence so complete, I could hear the ice shifting in the glasses at the nearest table. Marcus froze mid-sentence at the podium, his eyes locking onto mine across 400 stunned faces. I walked to that podium myself, and Marcus, to his credit, or perhaps simply out of shock, stepped aside without a word. 40 years ago, I said into that microphone, my voice still carrying the faint drag of the stroke. But strong enough now to fill that ballroom, my late wife Margaret and I signed a lease on a two-car garage with a check that nearly bounced. Everything in this room, every job, every truck, every contract, exists because of the people who showed up and did honest work when nobody was watching. I paused, letting my eyes move slowly across that crowd of employees. Men and women who had spent decades of their lives building something real with their hands. 3 weeks ago, while I was recovering from a stroke in a hospital bed, 2 members of my own family attempted to sell 60% of this company to a private equity fund at a valuation deliberately falsified to be $11 million below its true worth, using a legal clause that was only supposed to trigger under conditions I never actually met. They believed I would not survive the night. They were wrong. The gasp that moved through that room was audible, a single collective intake of breath. I watched Erica, seated at a front table in a gown that probably cost more than most of those employees made in a month, go rigid with humiliation as every head in the ballroom turned toward her and Marcus. I want to be clear, I continued. This is not a story about punishing my son for wanting more than what he was handed. It's a story about honesty. If Marcus had come to me and said, "Dad, I want to grow this company, I want to modernize it, I want to prove myself," I would have listened, because that is exactly the kind of ambition that built this place. Instead, he chose deception, timed to a moment when he believed I couldn't stop him. I effectively watched the 40th anniversary of my life's work become the public trial of my only son, and I felt no triumph in it, only the same cold, necessary clarity that had carried me through that hospital room. Some betrayals require a private reckoning. This one required a public one, because the 400 people in that room were the ones whose livelihoods Marcus had been prepared to gamble away without their knowledge or consent. The board voted that same week, unanimously, to remove Marcus from his position as Chief Operating Officer, citing breach of fiduciary duty. Bill Ostrander, the board chairman Marcus had been racing to reach before I woke up, later told me privately that Marcus had already begun laying groundwork for that emergency ratification, feeding him a carefully edited version of my prognosis designed to secure his signature before anyone could verify the truth. Bill hadn't signed yet. He told me, with real regret in his voice, that he'd wanted to visit me in person first. That single act of caution, one honest man's instinct to look me in the eye before signing away my company, had been the thin thread that gave Tom and Denise the window they needed. The private reckoning came 2 nights after the gala, at the house Margaret and I had raised Marcus in. The same house I had signed over to him and Erica 3 years earlier as a gift for their 10th anniversary. I drove there myself, still moving carefully, still favoring my left side, with Denise beside me and a folder of legal documents on my lap that Tom had prepared. I found Marcus in the driveway, alone, loading boxes into the trunk of his car in the cold evening air, his face gray with the particular exhaustion of a man watching every certainty of his life collapse in slow motion. "Erica left," he said before I could speak, not looking up from the box and his hands. "This morning. Took Lily to her mother's. Says she needs, quote, distance to figure out what she actually wants." He laughed, a hollow, broken sound. "Funny. That's the same excuse I gave you when I hid the Akron losses. I stood in that driveway, looking at my son, feeling the strange, aching collision of anger and grief, and something that refused to fully die no matter how badly he'd wounded me. I'm not here to gloat, Marcus," I said. "I'm here because Denise found something in your father-in-law's old workshop when we were clearing out documents from the Brentwood file. A toolbox. Steel, hand-stamped nameplate that says Hale and Son. My father gave it to me the day I opened that garage in 1985. I always meant to give it to you the day you finally earned it, not the day you inherited it." I set it down on the hood of his car, that same battered steel box. dented from 4 decades of use, the nameplate worn smooth in places from my father's hands and mine. "I'm not giving it to you tonight," I said. "You haven't earned it back yet, but I'm not giving up on the idea that you could someday, if you're willing to become the kind of man who tells the truth even when it costs him something." He stared at that toolbox for a long time, his hands still frozen around the box of belongings he was loading into his trunk, and for the first time since that whisper in the ICU, I saw something in his face that looked less like calculation and more like a boy standing in a garage that smelled like diesel and burnt coffee, watching his father build something out of nothing. The months that followed brought their own quiet justice. Brentwood Capital Partners quietly withdrew from all negotiations. The moment their broker, Devon, learned that the underlying valuation documents had been deliberately falsified, terrified of the fraud exposure it now represented. Marcus faced a formal investigation from the board's audit committee, though I made the deliberate choice, against Tom's advice, not to pursue criminal charges. Some justice, I decided, was better served by watching a man rebuild his own credibility from nothing than by watching him disappear into a courtroom. Erica filed for divorce 4 months later. I never spoke to her again, though I heard, through the careful grapevine of people who still cared enough to check on me, that she had moved to Columbus and taken a position at another private equity firm, chasing the exact kind of number she had once tried to extract from my company's bones. Denise became the company's president that spring, a title she had earned through 22 years of loyalty that never once wavered, even in the moments it would have been easiest to walk away. Under her direction, we established the Hartwell Employee Trust, funneling 15% of company equity directly into a fund, benefiting every full-time worker who had stood beside this company through its hardest years. The same people who had shown up on cold mornings long before Marcus had ever set foot in a boardroom. I saw Marcus occasionally after that, mostly at Lily's school events, where we'd sit 2 rows apart, not quite ready to sit together, not quite willing to abandon each other entirely either. It was there, at a spring assembly 6 months after the gala, that my 7-year-old granddaughter climbed into my lap during the reception afterward, still wearing her tiny cardboard crown from a classroom project, and asked me, with the particular blunt honesty only children seem capable of, "Grandpa, is the toolbox going to Daddy, or does it go to whoever earns it?" I looked down at her small, serious face and felt something in my chest finally settle into something like peace. "It goes to whoever earns it, sweetheart," I told her. "That's how it's always worked." I think about that whisper often, the one that started all of this, the one Erica believed no one on earth could hear. It taught me something I wish I had learned decades earlier, sitting at that kitchen table with Margaret, counting out change to make payroll. The people who truly love you will sit beside your hospital bed and pray for one more morning. The people who only love what you can give them will start planning your funeral before the sun comes up. I nearly went to my grave without knowing the difference. I am profoundly, endlessly grateful that I woke up in time to learn it. Never assume the people closest to you have earned the right to your trust simply because of the years they've shared your table. Trust is not inherited. It is proven every single day in the small, honest choices nobody is watching. And if you ever find yourself lying still, unable to speak, listen closely to what people say when they believe you can no longer hear them. That silence will tell you more truth than a lifetime of words ever could. If this story moved you, hit that like button, because betrayal deserves to be answered with truth, not silence. Subscribe for more real, raw stories about family, justice, and the quiet strength it takes to survive the people who were supposed to protect you. Drop a comment below and tell me, if you woke up and heard what Walter heard, what would you have done?